I had a terrible lunch from Trader Joe's. It was not what it advertised itself to be.
Oh, man.
That's fine.
Well, hello and welcome to Midweek Mashup. This is our opportunity for our pastors to interface a little more with our church online. And so I want to welcome Pastor Eric, who's our lead pastor, and gave the beginning of a two-part series this Sunday on balance. But before we get into that, kind of just so the folks at home can get to know you a little better, I understand that you are kind of a connoisseur of spicy foods.
That's true.
And this is very well known. We did a spicy ramen challenge last year with our staff. I did not do very well, but that was such a fun event, and so I kind of wanted to know, like, what is your draw to spicy food? Is the more flavorful spices, or do you just like being in pain when you eat? What is it about spicy food that's a draw for you?
First of all, like many different cultures have their different versions of spicy food, and I love to try new foods from all different, places around the world. And so, like, that's a part of it is just the variety, the way that people take basically similar ingredients and make such different food. So for me, it's the thrill of trying something new. There is some science behind why people enjoy spicy food. Makes you, like, it increases your mood, and so maybe it's an addiction for me, and I should seek help. But I really do love it. I do enjoy the burn. It's weird. Like, I actually enjoy that sensation, even though I may not look like it because my face will turn red and I'll sweat and it'll look like I'm in pain. But it's very good. I've actually had some of my most fun ministry moments around spicy food. We used to, I had, when I was a middle school pastor, I co-led a group of boys that we took through from 6th through 8th grade. And so we got really close with this group. And then I was their high school pastor afterwards. But one of our favorite things to do, they always asked, when can we go get wings? When can we go get wings? And we would go to this place in Northeast Ohio called Quaker Steak and Lube, which is a wing place, not a place to get your oil changed. But and they had these things called atomic wings and triple atomic wings. Wow. And I don't remember what the numbers are, but there's like a Scoville unit of like measures how spicy something is. Yeah. And so we would, do these challenges, and it was just fun. It was just fun, one of those things just to laugh about, to see who, would freak out a little bit. And we had one kid who was the smallest kid in the group, and he ate 8 triple atomic wings. Wow. And the whole restaurant was cheering because no one had ever seen anybody do that, let alone someone so small. They took his picture and put it up on the wall. Wow. And at the end of the night, he was shivering because he had gone from so hot and sweating from it to then being cold, which I guess is the natural response. Anyway, long story short, we just had a blast, and it was one of our favorite things to do, is just go get wings and see who could eat the spicy ones. Wow. No, that's incredible. Yeah. Well, hey, much like spice can kind of balance out the flavor of your food. That's right. Shameless transition there. We talked about balance and kind of spiritual rhythms this Sunday. Yeah. And so I wanted to kind of dive into your message a little bit. Was there anything that you kind of spoke about this Sunday that you felt you wanted to elaborate more on, given the time, or anything that you had to cut out for the same reason? Yeah, I did a little bit of a deep dive. I didn't do a very deep dive into the church history around revivalism and how that's kind of shaped how we interact with faith on a very emotional level, which isn't bad. But it just provided some context of kind of how we get into rhythms or lack of rhythms. Yeah. And I did cut a lot of stuff because I love church history. I love how the history of the American church has shaped us for who we are. One of the things that's really important for Christians to always remember is we didn't get here in a bubble. We didn't this week stumble upon a pure form of Christianity that no one's ever seen before. No, we've been shaped by all sorts of religious and cultural forces, and so I love digging into that stuff, and I love putting that in my sermons whenever I can. But when I was looking at it, it was like, if the first thing to go is my little rabbit trail into church history. So I cut that down pretty significantly. Yeah.
Well, if we were able to explore this rabbit trail a little bit, in just a couple minutes, like what are like the key things that someone who is wanting to know more about that church history and how we got from the book of Acts to today? That's kind of a loaded question because there's so much time in between. But like, what does that rabbit trail kind of look like?
Yeah, I think it's really important to I mean, we're a part of global church history, and yet there are significant movements that have shaped us for who we are, and you got to start with the fact that many people came here looking for freedom of religious persecution, right? And those same people very quickly religiously persecuted others, and I think that's always so fascinating how the cycles of behavior kind of are perpetuated, and so we have to own our history. Like that's one of the things that I think is really important for the church to do, is to see all the ways in which maybe we're complicit in some of the sinful patterns of our context, of the larger culture that we're a part of, and that shouldn't be hard for Christians to do. Our faith is built upon this idea that to have closeness with God, repentance is required, right? And yet I think sometimes we find it really hard to look back at our past and say, oh no, we did some messed up stuff. And to say, hey, the version of Christianity we have was shaped by some of those things, and how do we make sure we don't carry on the sins of our forefathers or even past generations of our own church or whatever? I think that's really important. Because at the same time, it's such a part of Christianity is personally looking back and saying, where have I gone wrong? Where has my heart been twisted up? Where have I strayed away from God? But we're not just individuals. We're part of a community, and we're part of a bigger movement, and a part of a bigger culture. And so I think it's just really key for us to know our history, to own where things went wrong, and to make sure we don't become those same people. So that's always fun for me. And so yesterday, I did a little bit of a dive into revivalism, which is revivalism is a mix of good and bad. Right? There's some very significant spiritual movements that came out of this call to repentance, this call to live for Jesus. And then there were always the grifters. There were the ones who saw, hey, we can make money, or we can get power by doing this. And so you had, people kind of mimicking and running a play out of that revival playbook in order to gain, authority and money in some occasions. And so, what I noticed about that is that can breed a type of charismatic leader who knows how to manipulate people really well for a desired outcome. And so, there's a piece of me that's always hyper vigilant about that. I don't want that to be the brand of leadership that I employ, and I don't think it's from Jesus. So I don't want people to get swept up into that because it's harmful. And yet we can't discount that significant, like I said, spiritual renewal came through these revival movements. But so much of our church, practice in evangelicalism today is shaped by that revivalism, that our worship services take the form of a revival type of service. In many cases, it's this idea that if we play to a person's emotions, we can get them to make an emotional decision and get them to respond. Right. And if that lasts, if that turns into discipleship, well, then the end justifies the means. And on the flip side, you've got other churches that only want to appeal to the mind and forget that we are a whole person with emotions as well. And so we need to do all of that. We need to disciple people emotionally. We need to disciple people intellectually. We need to have a holistic approach to discipleship, and that needs to make its way into not just our services, but all of our church. So I've veered off probably further than maybe we wanted to go there, but that's the stuff that was rattling in my head as I wrote the sermon. So
No, that's great. I think it's really important. It's very difficult sometimes, I think, for the congregation to kind of get inside of the mind of the pastor, and as pastors, it's difficult to take all of this information that we have, and there's so much great stuff, and the Bible is the greatest story ever ever written. And even just tracing the church from the time of the Bible to where the church is today, there's so much content here. How do we kind of smush that down in 25 to 35 minutes?
It's hard.
And so that's a challenge. And so this is a great stage to share these things. And so for someone who's tuning in and is saying to themselves, okay, like I acknowledge my need to find some balance in my life, and things have been really chaotic with, like, I became a Christian, but then I was after the wrong things, and now I'm kind of like trying to recenter myself and refocus. What are some tips that you might give to someone who's in that situation? The metaphor that you gave in your sermon was pitching baseball with your son, and your son, being a very practiced Little League pitcher, is able to pitch at least 1 mile an hour faster than you was what you were saying.
Till next time, I'm going to catch up. I'm going to start practicing.
But it's really easy as Christians to look at where someone else is and say, oh, well, they're very practiced and they have this balance and they are very in tune with their spiritual rhythms and things like that. It's very easy to compare sometimes. How do we kind of avoid comparing and instead start practicing?
That's so good. Yeah. One of the things that is really important for Christians to remember is that following Jesus is not a competition, right? Like, so comparing ourselves to other people doesn't do anything, because if we're just being honest with ourselves, if I were to, look to somebody else as my measuring stick of where my spiritual health is, I might be like, well, I pray more than that person, so I'm doing great. But it's always, Jesus is the measuring stick, and we all fall short, right? So to recognize, hey, on the scale from no spiritual practices or health at all to Jesus, we're all way closer to this side than we are to Jesus. And so one, we can't be prideful about it, and we also can't beat ourselves up because this person seems to be more holy than I am or whatever. There's also, sometimes and don't get me wrong here, this is going to sound heretical, so I don't want any fights about this, but there's an overemphasis of some spiritual practices and a de-emphasis of other spiritual practices. So for us as evangelicals, it's Bible and prayer, to the point where I've been in churches where a pastor who is really, was a spiritual director, really was great at helping people connect with God, was teaching on spiritual practices and kind of got in trouble for it. Like, no, we do Bible and prayer. And I'm like, we can do Bible and prayer and these other things, because there's many ways to do Bible and prayer. There's no one set way to be a reader of the Bible, or there's no one set way to pray. And additionally, there are all sorts of other things that might really be impactful to a person in a certain season. I've been through seasons where I felt like I couldn't hear God. I was praying. I was doing all the things. I was reading my Bible. I was praying, and I felt like there was this roadblock between me and God, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And traditionally, this has been called a dark night of the soul. That's kind of the way it's been described by many Christians over the last 2,000 years. And it wasn't because I was leading this secret sinful lifestyle. It wasn't because I was losing faith. It was there was a barrier between me and God. And I read a great book called Dark Night of the Soul, and it actually traced two Catholic saints and their letters back and forth, because each of these two ministers were experiencing this same thing I was describing. And they kind of came to the conclusion that God is doing something that you haven't, trained yourself to hear. He's speaking on a frequency that you haven't tuned in on your radio, because he's bigger than you think he is. And so, it was I started journaling, and that was not something I had done before. And I started doing breath prayer, which is, breathing in God's grace, breathing out praise. I started doing things like, palms up, palm down prayer, like incorporating my body into my prayer life instead of just, what rut I was stuck in. And it wasn't a quick fix. There was no easy answer. It was a tough season of my walk with Jesus. And when I came out the other side of it, it's because God was trying to show me something new that I wasn't ready for. And and the preparation of saying, okay, God, I'm ready. I'm ready to see you in a bigger, through a bigger lens. I'm ready to do this thing that you're calling me to do that I wasn't ready to do. I didn't want to do. And it actually going through that dark night of the soul increased my faith tremendously because I stayed committed to these spiritual practices. So that was a long way of saying that, like, there are many things that may, unlock intimacy with God that people haven't experienced before. And so I hope that in this next week we can introduce some of those things for people to try. The last thing I would say on this for people who are like, I don't know where to start or I feel stuck, is I think sometimes people think of spiritual practices as a solo effort. And they're just not. Most of the Bible is written to a community of people, not just to individuals. So this kind of, the language of, I have a personal relationship with Jesus is really good, but most people interpret that to say I have a private relationship with Jesus. It's personal because, I'm connected to him. I don't need anybody else necessarily. He's the one who saved me, but it's not private. Other people need to be welcomed into it, or else my discipleship efforts are going to be stunted, because I have my blind spots, I have my spiritual gifts, and I have weaknesses as well. And so inviting other people to practice these things with you, reading the Bible in community, praying in community, prayer walking neighborhoods with other people, not just yourself, it can be really helpful. So week 1 was all about, hey, here's my case for why you need to prioritize time, and you have to plan ahead if you're going to have a healthy spiritual walk with Jesus, right? This week is going to be almost like a menu of spiritual practices that you can engage in, both as an individual and in community, so that you can actually make the most of that time. And so, real quickly, I'll say this multiple times this weekend, but I'm going to say it now too. I'm not giving people a list of things to overwhelm you with. You got to do all these things to be close to Jesus. It's one at a time. Try these things and experiment with different ways of connecting with Jesus. And so that's what I hope to accomplish. Just give people a jumping off point with these practices, so they can experience Jesus in new ways.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, hey, thanks once again for joining us, and for everyone at home, we will see you next week.